The sun hung low over the endless plains of Montana, painting the sky in strokes of fire and gold, as if the heavens themselves were weeping for the man on the horse. Jake Harlan gripped the reins of his weathered Appaloosa, Old Thunder, his knuckles white against the cracked leather. He'd ridden these trails for 30 years, chasing cattle drives and dodging dust storms, but today, the vastness felt like a cage. A single tear carved a path through the grime on his cheek, the first in decades. Cowboys didn't cry, not in the rugged heart of America, where men were forged from iron and silence. But Jake wasn't just any cowboy. He was a man whose heart had been branded by love, and now it bore the scar of loss deeper than any spur could etch. It had started 5 years back, under a sky much like this one. Jake had been a drifter then, 35 and wild as the Mustangs he broke, hauling freight across the Badlands for a living that paid in blisters and bourbon. That's when he met Eliza in Billings, at a dusty saloon where the piano wailed like a lonesome coyote. She was a schoolteacher from Ohio, with eyes like prairie violets and a laugh that could coax rain from a cloudless day. "Your trouble, cowboy," she'd teased, her fingers tracing the fringe on his chaps as they danced under lantern light. But Jake saw in her what no one else did, a quiet fire, the kind that warmed without burning. They married 6 months later in a clapboard church, vowing forever amid the scent of sagebrush and wild roses. Life on the ranch they built together was a symphony of simple joys. Mornings began with Eliza's coffee brewing on the wood stove, black as midnight and sweet as her whispered, "Good morning." Afternoons were for mending fences or reading to the ranch hands' kids, her voice weaving stories of far-off places that made even the hardest souls dream. Jake, who could barely spell his name, learned his letters from her, tracing them on her palm late at night while the stars wheeled overhead. "You're my anchor in this storm," he'd murmur, pulling her close. She was the softness to his grit, the melody to his rumble. Together, they turned a patch of unforgiving earth into a home, raising a few head of cattle and planting dreams that bloomed brighter than any harvest. But dreams, like wildflowers, wilt under the heel of fate. It came on quiet, that thief in the night, consumption, the doc called it, his voice grave as a fresh-dug grave. Eliza fought it with the ferocity of a cornered bobcat, brewing teas from roots and herbs, her hands trembling but never still. Jake watched her fade, day by stolen day, his world narrowing to the creak of her rocking chair and the rasp in her breath. "Promise me you'll keep living, Jake," she whispered one autumn evening, her fingers cold in his. "Don't let the hurt turn you to stone. Find the good in folks, it's there, even in the broken ones." He nodded, throat tight, but the words lodged like barbed wire in his chest. She slipped away at dawn, the first snow dusting the windows like forgotten sugar. Jake buried her under the old cottonwood by the creek, the one where they'd carved their initials on a whim. The ranch hands came, hats in hand, murmuring condolences before drifting back to their chores. The world spun on, indifferent as a dust devil. Jake sold off the cattle to pay debts, the silence of the empty corral echoing louder than any stampede. Nights blurred into whiskey haze, days into mechanical toil, fencing, feeding the few horses left, staring at horizons that promised nothing. He became the ghost of the man Eliza loved, his heart a rusted lock no key could turn. Word spread through the valleys like wildfire on dry grass, Jake Harlan, the unbreakable cowboy, was breaking. Folks in town pitied him from afar, whispering over potlucks about the widower who spoke to no one. But Jake kept to the shadows, his Stetson pulled low, convinced that vulnerability was a luxury for fools. Until the day the stranger rode in, shattering the fragile peace of his solitude. It was midsummer, the air thick with heat that shimmered like a mirage. Jake was out by the corral, wrestling a loose post back into the earth, sweat stinging his eyes, when the dust cloud appeared on the horizon. A lone rider, silhouette blurred by the haze, approached slow as a funeral procession. As it drew near, Jake straightened, hand instinctively drifting to the colt at his hip. Strangers in these parts meant trouble, rustlers, claim jumpers, or worse. The horse halted 10 paces off, a bay mare lathered and spent. Its rider was a girl, no more than 16, her clothes threadbare and caked in trail dust. Dark hair escaped a frayed braid, framing a face sharp with hunger and defiance. She clutched a worn saddlebag like a lifeline, eyes the color of storm clouds scanning Jake with wary calculation. "Mister," she said, voice cracking like parched leather, "you got work? Or a meal? I'll earn it, muck stalls, mend tack, anything." Jake eyed her, suspicion coiling in his gut. Runaways weren't uncommon, the West chewed up dreams and spat out orphans. "Ain't hirin'," he grunted, turning back to the post. "Town's 5 miles east. Try the saloon." She didn't budge. "Town's got nothin' for me. Pa's gone, fever took him last winter. Ma, she couldn't keep us fed." Her chin lifted, a spark of pride amid the plea. "I can ride, shoot straight. Name's Lila. Lila Kane." Something in her voice, a tremor masked by grit, tugged at the frayed edges of Jake's resolve. It echoed Eliza's stories of lost children in her books, the ones she'd read with tears glistening. He wanted to send her packing, to retreat into his armor of solitude. But those violet eyes of his late wife flickered in his mind, urging him forward. "One meal," he relented, jerking his head toward the cabin. "Then you're gone at dawn." Inside, the cabin smelled of stale coffee and regret, the table set for one like a mocking throne. Lila devoured the beans and cornbread Jake shoved her way, manners forgotten in the face of starvation. Between bites, fragments spilled out, a homestead in Wyoming lost to drought, brothers scattered to the winds, a ma remarried to a brute who wielded fists like hammers. "I lit out 3 weeks back," she said, wiping her mouth with a sleeve. "Figured the open road'd set me free." Jake listened from the doorway, arms crossed, the weight of her words settling like lead in his chest. Freedom. He'd chased it once, before Eliza moored him. Now it tasted of ash. "Road's no place for a girl alone," he muttered. "Bears, bandits, worse." She met his gaze, unflinching. "Better than stayin' caged." That night, thunder rolled in from the west, a tempest that shook the cabin walls. Jake lay awake, the girl's words churning like the storm outside. Dawn brought a revelation he couldn't ignore. Lila's mare had thrown a shoe in the night, lamed beyond riding. She stood in the downpour, rigging a makeshift pack from her saddlebag, determination etched in every line. But as she turned to leave on foot, Jake stepped out, slicker dripping. "Foolish," he called. "You'll be buzzard bait by noon." She paused, rain streaking her face like tears. "Got no choice." He sighed, the sound lost in the gale. "Stay till she heals. 1 week. Then clear out." It was kindness, reluctant and raw, the first crack in his stony facade. Lila's eyes widened, a flicker of hope breaking through. For the first time in years, Jake felt the ghost of Eliza smile. The week stretched into days of uneasy rhythm. Lila proved her salt, hauling hay bales that dwarfed her frame, gentling old thunder with whispers Jake had forgotten how to use. Evenings, she'd spin tales by the fire, yarns of riverboats and railroad kings that painted the cabin in colors long faded. Jake grunted responses, but inside, stirrings awakened, laughter, rusty and rare, bubbling up at her mimicry of town gossips. She asked about Eliza once, spotting the locket on the mantel, its silver tarnished but cherished. "She sounds like a force," Lila said softly. "Like someone who'd fight the devil for what she loved." Jake's throat closed. She did. That night, alone under the stars, he wept, not for the loss, but for the life he'd let atrophy. Kindness, Eliza had said. It was a seed, buried deep, now pushing through cracked soil. But the West doesn't yield its secrets easy. On the 6th day, as Lila curried the mare in the barn, a shadow fell across the doorway. 3 riders, hard-eyed and hungover, reined in their mounts, outlaws by the look of their scarred holsters and sneers. The leader, a scar-faced brute named Red Harlan, no kin, thank God, spat tobacco juice and grinned. "Heard there's a soft-hearted rancher round these parts. Dawn broke clear over the ranch, the storm's fury washed away, leaving air crisp as new-forged steel. Jake rose before the sun, the gash on his arm a dull throb beneath fresh bandages, but his steps carried a lightness absent for years. Lila stirred in the loft, her snores a testament to exhausted trust. He'd slipped the gold pouch into a strongbox bound for the stagecoach that afternoon, addressed to no one, just a note, for new beginnings. Watching it go, Jake felt unburdened, as if Eliza's spirit had lifted the weight from his shoulders. Kindness, he'd learned, was a boomerang, what you cast out returned tenfold. The days that followed wove a fragile tapestry of companionship. Lila stayed on, the mare's hoof mending slower than expected, but neither pressed the issue. She took to the land like a colt to grass, branding irons no longer daunted her, and her aim with a rifle shamed the local hunters. Jake taught her the ranch's rhythms, when to turn the hay, how to read the wind's whisper in the cottonwoods. In return, she coaxed stories from him, gentle as drawing water from a deep well. Tales of cattle wars and ghost towns spilled forth, laced with laughter at his younger follies. You were a rascal, she'd grin, eyes sparkling. Eliza must have tamed you proper. Jake would chuckle, the sound foreign yet fitting, like an old boot broken in anew. Evenings by the fire became ritual, Lila sketching maps of imagined adventures on scrap paper, Jake whittling figures from pine, a horse for her, a flower for Eliza's grave. Through it, he glimpsed the power of humanity's quiet threads, a shared meal staving off loneliness, a listening ear mending invisible wounds. The ranch, once a tomb, hummed with life, chickens scratching in the yard, the distant low of a borrowed steer. Word trickled to town, folks nodded when Jake rode in for nails, their wariness thawing to tentative smiles. But the West, ever capricious, brewed storms beneath sunny skies. It came on a crisp October morn, leaves turning gold like Eliza's locket in sunlight. Jake and Lila were mending the north fence when hoofbeats echoed, not the lazy trot of neighbors, but a gallop heavy with urgency. A boy, no older than 12, burst from the tree lean on a foam-flecked pony, face streaked with tears and terror. Paws hurt bad, he sobbed, tumbling into Jake's arms. Bear got him, up in the timberline. Ma sent me, please, mister. The boy's name was Tommy Ellis, from the neighboring spread, a family scraping by on timber claims and sheer will. Jake knew them vaguely, Widow Ellis, tough as boot leather, raising 3 young'uns after her husband lit out years back. Now, fate's claw had struck again. Stay with Lila, Jake ordered, swinging on to Old Thunder. Bar the door if need be. Lila nodded, rifle in hand, her face a mask of resolve. The ride to the timberline was a blur of pine-scented wind and pounding heart. Jake found Jed Ellis, Tommy's pa, a logger with arms like oak, pinned under a fallen spruce, his leg mangled where the bear had dragged him before fleeing. Blood soaked the earth, Jed's face ashen, breaths shallow. Bear, came for the honey cash, he rasped, eyes glazing. Told the boy to run. Jake worked fast, tearing his shirt for a tourniquet, binding the wound with practiced hands. Hold on, Jed. Doc's comin', Dot. But the man seized his sleeve, voice a gravel whisper. The claim, it's all we got. Banks circlin' like vultures. If I go, they're lost. Desperation cracked his facade, revealing the fear of a father facing the void. Compassion surged in Jake, hot and unbidden, a echo of his own nights bargaining with God over Eliza. He couldn't save Jed from death's door, but the family. That he could fight for. You ain't goin' nowhere yet, he lied gently, hoisting the man onto Thunder with a grunt. And that claim's yours. I'll see to it. The doc met them halfway, wagon rattling with supplies. Jed clung to life through the night, fever raging like a prairie fire. Jake rode to town under cover of dusk, the bank's ledger his target. Old man Hargrove, the proprietor, leaned back in his oak chair, cigar smoke curling like a serpent. Ellis is late on payments, Harlan. 2 months. Foreclosure's law. Jake planted his palms on the desk, Stetson shadowing eyes ablaze. Laws cold as a snake, Hargrove. Man's fightin' for breath, kid starvin'. I got 500 saved, Eliza's nest egg. Covers it clean. Hargrove's brow arched, surprise flickering. Jake Harlan, the hermit, bargaining for strangers. Why? Ain't your fight. Jake paused, the question piercing like Jed's pain. Why indeed? For the boy who'd ridden through hell for his pa. For Lila, who'd chosen fight over flight. For Eliza, whose voice whispered of humanity's unbreakable chain. Because some debts ain't paid in gold, he said. They're paid in grace. The banker relented, papers signed by lantern light. Jake rode home under stars thick as scattered diamonds, exhaustion mingling with a profound peace. He'd given not from surplus, but from the marrow of his grief, transforming loss into legacy. Word spread faster than Jake could rein it. By week's end, Jed stabilized, the bear's pelt tanned as a trophy. The Ellis clan arrived at the ranch in a buckboard piled with pies and promises, Ma Ellis enveloping Jake in a hug that smelled of lavender and gratitude. You're a saint, Harlan, she choked, Tommy clinging to his leg. Just a neighbor, Jake demurred, but Lila's knowing glance said otherwise. That evening, as the families gathered round a bonfire, stories flying, fiddles tuning, the unexpected turned profound. From the shadows emerged a figure Jake hadn't seen in years, his brother, Caleb, gaunt and road-worn, eyes haunted by ghosts of their shared youth. Heard about the ruckus, Caleb said, voice rough. Figured it was time I stopped running. Caleb had vanished a decade back, after their pa's death splintered the family, guilt over a bar fight gone wrong, debts that drowned him in drink. Jake had nursed the grudge like a thorn, but now, seeing the lines etched by regret, realization bloomed, grudges were chains, forgiveness the key. Eliza'd say it's never too late, Jake murmured, clapping his brother's shoulder. They talked till embers died, mending what time had torn. The climax crested on All Hallows' Eve, frost nipping the air like a lover's bite. The ranch swelled with unlikely kin, neighbors, hands, even Hargrove with his missus, sharing harvest bounty under a harvest moon. Lila, blooming from girl to guardian, led the young uns in games of tag through the hay bales. Jed, on crutches, raised a tin cup, to Jake Harlan, the cowboy who cried and showed us how to heal. Jake stood at the fire's edge, throat tight, the weight of eyes upon him. He'd come here broken, tears hidden behind bravado. Now, vulnerability was his strength, selflessness the forge that reforged him. As laughter rang out, he slipped away to Eliza's grave, the cottonwood whispering secrets. Kneeling, he traced their initials, worn smooth by wind and wonder. You were right, darlin'. The good's in the given. A rustle, Lila, bearing a lantern, her face soft in its glow. She'd be proud, she said, placing a wild rose at the stone. Together, they watched the firelight dance, a beacon against the dark. In the months that followed, the ranch thrived not on gold, but on the humanity that bound them. Lila chose to stay, apprentice to the land and Jake's quiet wisdom, her own dreams taking root in Montana soil. Caleb mended fences literal and figurative, the brothers rebuilding what estrangement had raised. Jed's claim flourished, the Ellis young'uns filling the valleys with whoops and wonder. Jake Harlan, the cowboy who cried, learned that tears weren't defeat, but the rain that nourished parched souls. In the heart of America's wild expanse, where horizons met heaven, he discovered that true love, be it lost or found, endures through acts of unyielding kindness. And in that selflessness, humanity's fire burned eternal, warming the coldest nights, inspiring the weariest hearts to rise and ride on. For in the end, it's not the miles we cover, but the hands we hold, that etch our legacy on the endless plain. And so, under skies vast and forgiving, hope whispered, the story ain't over, it's just gettin' good.